things. One is, I don't want to contradict him, but if you want to keep your phones on, it's good because it wakes people up every 10, 12 minutes or so. No, we don't like that? Okay, fine. So no. So do with your phones what you need to do. Second, those of you who don't know with the sources, which I generally prepare very, very late. So there is a list that we have that I send them out, so you can ask someone else how to join it, ask me how to join it, and with that we could begin. So this week is Parashat Ki Tavo. So we like Parashat Ki Tavo. Yes?
No, we didn't. Only the first one.
So when we were in America for a couple days, last week we were there, Ki Tetzei, so and then we left Ki Tetzei and we came back here at Ki Tavo, which is the 41st anniversary of the same dynamic when we made Aliyah. So we did that. Our last Shabbat there was Ki Tetzei, and our first Shabbat here was Ki Tavo. The only difference is that we had Sheva Brachot that week, and this week we didn't have Sheva Brachot. Well, I'm sure we made some brachot, but it was not the same. So we liked Ki Tavo just for that reason, Ki Tavo al Aretz. So let's start to have a chance to understand all of this. And those of you who said right away, no, I don't like this parsha, of course not. It has a terrible tochacha in it, terrible rebuke. So let's put the rebuke on the side for a moment, and we'll try to get a little bit more context. So one, we seem to, in our lengthy Bein Hazmanim, we seem to have missed the vast majority of the book of Devarim. So you probably don't know what we're up to. On the other hand, we talk about these things with very broad strokes. Devarim is some kind of a repetition. The reality we've noted over the years is that it's far more repetition of narrative than it is repetition of laws. And now as we're getting towards the end, there is some kind of an important shift. But even without the shift, I do want to isolate and identify what we do have in this week's parsha, because there's three things prior to the tochacha and that we need to note, and they're certainly connected, so that's part of what we need to see. When we moved in the last couple of weeks, going from I would even say from Re'eh, which is a focus on the Beit HaMikdash, Makom Sheyivchar Hashem, and then we move on to Shoftim, which are national institutions, and we move on then to Ki Tetzei, issues of war, which we already had also in Shoftim, which means the mitzvot that we're having, it's not simply a repetition of other things. The mitzvot that we're having are mitzvot which express a new reality, and that reality is one which, let's be honest, we haven't lived for the most part of the last 2,000 years, and that is the reality of having a national identity and not just living as Jews. One of the things that we'll get to is, we'll hopefully, we'll get to Yaakov Avinu keeping all the 613 mitzvot, right? Yaakov kept love and guarantee, Taryag mitzvot. So any Jew today who's going to say, no, we live by Torah, well, no, you live by a small fraction of Torah. And then we could just start with a mitzvah tluot ba'aretz, dealing with the whole agriculture, but it's more than the agriculture. It's also the national institutions. And the challenges of having a national life in Israel is one which, again, it just can't even be imitated in certain places. So let's begin. Beginning of Ki Tavo, and we'll pay attention to certain things. Vaya ki tavo la'aretz asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha, and I'm deliberately stopping before I should stop, because I could say when you come to the land which God gives you, but you realize that that's the wrong place to stop, because what's the next word? Nachala. And what does nachala mean? It's an inheritance, which means right away, and okay, just to strengthen the point, the rest of the pasuk, V'yirashta, and again, I know I have two more words. So, nachala v'yirashta. It's an inheritance and inherited, which means that our right to this land is predicated on a certain introduction. And what's that introduction? So I'll say it simply. That introduction is Sefer Bereshit. You can't read this without Sefer Bereshit. I gave a class a number of years ago, which I sent to you, and I liked it as well. And he's not being paid for the endorsement, by the way. And now, okay, it was so-so. It was showing how Kitetse is a commentary on Sefer Bereshit, and for that matter, the last third of Bereshit, seeing that whole undertone. But over here, you can't read these words without realizing something. And I know that this is something which certain scholars are obsessed about. What exactly is known by the quote-unquote Deuteronomist? And well, Moshe Rabbeinu learns Torah from Kodesh Baruch Hu, so I assume he knows quite a lot. Over here, the land of Israel is ours to inherit, but inherit means we got it from someone. It means there's a background. It means there's a backstory. It means there's a history. It also may tell us a lot more, but just realize that our orientation to this land is, it's a nachala, therefore, v'yirashta, v'yashafta ba. And therefore, anybody who chooses not to live here is actually turning their back on their inheritance. They're turning their back on something which God has commanded us to do. So let's pause. I'll try for the Zionist messages not to be overwhelming. We don't. You know, there are people in Chutz La'aretz listen to this. I think they do it on double speed, and they skip this part. Okay. What I'm going to say now is probably very far from shot. For Lakachta Reshit, so I like that. I like Reshit. Reshit reminds me of Bereshit, and it reminds me of that. There's again this backstory. Also, the first is very important, and this is something we've discussed on a different theological level, and that is, I would say that one can't miss that the first mitzvah here of the first fruits of Bikurim is most likely some kind of a tikkun for that first fruit that we were supposed to not eat in the Garden of Eden. And here we give this whole background in terms of everything coming from God, and there we took something which God told us not to take. So there is this real interesting backstory, which I hope you realize that we can develop more, but we won't. The Aramaic vatena is a sal, right? You know the word sal. You'll put it in a sal, salenu al katvenu, right? We'll put it in a V'halachta el hamakom. By the way, el hamakom, that's a very Devarim word and concept, the central place that we're going to go to. El hamakom asher yivchar Hashem, right? The central place of worship. Hamakom asher yivchar Hashem elokecha, l'shakein shemo sham. There is a holy place, which is great. There's a holy land. There's a holy place within the land. Uvanta lakon asher yeh b'yamim ahim, and you're going to come to this Kohen in those days, and you're going to say, V'amarti lav, higadati hayom l'Hashem lakecha, kivati el haaretz, asher nishba Hashem la'avotenu latet lanu. So again, this land which God had promised to our ancestors, to the patriarchs, the matriarchs, if you want. That means, again, the same backstory, which I, kind of teased out of the word nachala, is here. It's said in such an obvious way. So let us now set what I want to get to as the major issue today. I mean, sometimes it takes you, a week to figure out. So what was that major issue that I was talking about? It's this duality and the relationship between the rights to the land that we have, and rights and responsibilities, and the rights to the land which we inherited, which means inheriting, which means we are in the place of somebody else. Which means what exactly is the orientation of the avot to the land, and what exactly is the orientation of the banim to the land? Avot versus banim is really the tension, what I want to try to understand, but I am already noting that in our first couple of verses over here, both of these things should be jumping out at you. Now, you did not necessarily anticipate that I'm going to talk about responsibilities and go a bit further and the nature of the relationship. Okay, that's why I had to tell you where I'm going. And it goes on to say over here, and you take the cell and you go to the Mizbeach, and Vanita Bamarta Lifnei Hashem Alakecha, Arami Oved Avi. And we go back and we talk about the past, and we talk about the ancestors, and we talk about where we came from. So again, I'm going to say, I hope you don't miss this, but we're going to have here in the beginning of the Parsha 3 rituals. I could ask you the obvious question, are these just random rituals? I mean, essentially, you can imagine that Moshe's got a big bag of mitzvot that he has to kind of share with us, and therefore the bag is getting empty because every week he uses more and more up, and now these, at the bottom of the bag, he pulls out this one. Or is there something much more specific about this one and the next one? And the next one, which are coming up over here. The third one is going to be the easiest and the one that we most likely would have related to. But over here again, I'm just pointing out that this is, yes, the Arambid Avid Avi, we are more familiar with, ironically, with Pesach than we are with Bikurim, which is somewhat bizarre. And it's interesting that it also becomes the major text whereby we springboard our Pesach Seder, and it's as much their Torah Sheba'al Peh as it is the formal text. By the Bikurim, we say a formal text. We don't add the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And when we say this text, we give context. Now, of course, there's this great discussion, who exactly is this Avi? Who are we talking about? And I'm going to leave that. Vayered Mitzrayma, vayagar sham mitei ma'at, vayisham l'goy gadol vatzum rav. So that verse itself should link us between the avot and between the banim. We're talking about where the avot come from, and we're talking about how the banim got to be in this place. And we screamed out to God, and God heard our voices. Vayaret anyenu v'tamaleinu lachatzenu. V'yitzenu Hashem mitzrayim biyad chazakat. And again, that's talking about the new generation. I know there's a newer generation, you don't have to tell me. And God took us out with all these miracles and wonders. Vayivenu ela makom hazeh. Again, it goes back to this point of makom, the place, the holy place. V'yitin lanu et haaretz hazot, eretz zavat chalav udvash. So there is a tension. We don't know it yet, but there is a tension. We'll continue a little bit. V'ata hinei veti et reshit pri adama. I've done the ritual, I've done that which I was told to do, but of course, this is a fascinating mitzvah because it's not just performative in the sense that I do an action, it's also, there's a level of cognition and there's a level of I need to articulate and therefore I need to internalize. And it's just so wonderful that what I need to do is actually, I need to develop my historical consciousness to understand how I got here, why I got here, and have thanks for getting here, which really it's a link between the present and the past. So that's what I wanted to focus on. And as we continue, there's another last thing I want to get to, and we thank God. And then Pasuk Yud Aleph, which is maybe the most difficult mitzvah for this generation, and that's to be happy. V'samachta b'chol hatov asher natan lecha Hashem Elokecha uleveitecha, ata v'halevi v'hager asher b'kirbecha. And that's interesting because when I break all of this down, yes, I bring the first fruits, as I said, I put it in the basket, I carry it up to Jerusalem, I make the declaration, and then, okay, now you better be happy whether you like it or not, and not just be happy. The happy has to spill over and affect the others, and affect the Levi, and affect the stranger, and affect the stranger. And what I want to stress about that, because you're not going to get there without me. You do need me still. There is something, even though you don't realize this yet, there's something very Avraham-like within that quality. Do I have to explain that now, or it's enough that I said that? Avraham-like. Because Avraham is the one who spreads the joy. Avraham who spreads what God gave him. Avraham is the one who reaches out to the stranger. Avraham is the one who shares to the stranger. So that I find really interesting because if we're, again, thinking about this linkage between the present and the past, and we're thinking about what is it that is going to allow us to deserve this land that we have, isn't it interesting that we have a ritual over here which forces us to have this link to the past, to think about, and to say it, to go back to how we got here, to label what we're doing as what we have as a nachala and what we have is a Yerusha, and then to act very Avraham-like. And by the way, if that wasn't good enough, we then continue right afterwards. Ki techlela aseret kol ma'aser tevotcha, And it talks about in the third year bringing the maaser, bringing, right? V'natata l'levi, lager, liyotam, v'la'almana. Do I have to stress that again, that is also very, very Avraham-like in taking care of the disenfranchised and taking care of those who are in need. V'achlu b'sharecha v'savehu. Take them in, should I say, take them into your tents which are opened in all four corners. And I know that you're gonna, you didn't see this by yourselves. And I don't know if any of the commentaries point this out. And all of that makes no difference to me, because we'll see as we move on that this should be understood. And then in Pasuk Tedvav, Yishkif imon kachechem min hashamayim v'rechet amcha et Yisrael et adama asher natata lanu, the land given to us. And in that same twist, kasher nishbata lavotenu eretz avad chalav udvash. So again, just pay attention to that duality. Yes, it's our land. Why is it our land? Because God promised it in the past to the Avot. So this tension between and I'm going to call it again, the Avot and the Banim, is what I think is a subtext going all the way through here. And therefore, in order to identify Avot type of behavior is interesting. If we continue and we look in the Ramban is on Perek Kaf Vav Pasuk Yud Zayin, right? Maybe I skipped that Pasuk. Pasuk Yud Zayin, let's read the Pasuk. Hashem ha'amarta hayom, we spoke last year, was only on that Pasuk. Liot l'cha lelokim v'lalechet b'drachav, and that's really interesting. What does it mean to go in God's ways and God's paths? V'lishmor chukav u'mitzvatav u'mishpatav v'lishmoa b'kolo. So I would love to know what each one of those words mean, or each part of those phrases mean. What does it mean, lechet b'drachav? What does it mean, l'shmor chukav? What's mitzvotav? What's mishpatav? What's on top of all that, l'shmoa b'kolo? So you do realize that it would be beneficial if we actually understood, again, not using just the words that we would literally translate, but what each one of those things mean. Take a look at the Ramban in source number 2. V'lechet b'drachav. So what does it mean to go in God's paths? Shetasu hatov v'yayashar v'tigmlo chesed ish et re'ehu. And do you know what all of that means to me? To be Avraham-like. Because what didn't it say to us? It didn't say to us, make sure you do all Taryag mitzvot. It didn't say to us to get involved in every single one of the rituals. It says, no. Shetatsu hatov v'yashar v'tagnu chesed ish et re'ehu. Be decent, be moral, be good, be charitable. Ulishmor chukav mitzvah mishpatav yaskir b'frat u'chuy mishpatim kasher pirashti v'yichlo b'mitzvotav kol mitzvot mitzvotasei v'lo tasei v'lishmor b'kolo. That's mitzvot already. Lishmor b'kolo k'chol asher yitzaveh lachem. But just notice the breakup between those two parts of the verse. Lechet b'drachav is what I would call avot behavior. To do the others mitzvotav and so on and so forth, that's very much banim oriented. Should I explain this a little bit more? Yes, we know that, maybe we'll see some of the sources. We know Avram kept the entire Torah. Yes? Yes or no? Maybe. I hope you realize that's at least a little problematic. First of all, or we'll pick on Yaakov. Yaakov kept all the mitzvot, Taryag mitzvot. Yaakov could not keep all Taryag mitzvot unless he was, I was going to go much more than that. Unless he was a Kohen Yisrael and a Levi, unless he was a man and a woman, unless he had two brothers who died, and one he did Yibum and one he did Chalitza. Right? I'm just saying, unless he gave a get to one of his wives. Again, I can keep on going if you want of the various Taryag mitzvot, and I just don't believe that that's what Chazal mean when they say it. I'm not going to tell you not to. You can believe what you want. You'll tell me that I have to get yain mavushal. It's okay. What I'm saying is that it doesn't say that that Avram performed this. Rather, he was mekayem, which means I shouldn't think that because I put on tefillin this morning, which I may have thought about, not thought about, or may have really had a high spiritual experience or not, that Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov and Sarah Rivka Rachel and Leah were all, and Bilam and Zilpah, by the way, were all on a higher spiritual level than I am, even though I can say, yeah, but I put on tefillin today. Because whatever spiritual accomplishment I got to, or I performed by doing this, they somehow got to that same spiritual level. They were makayem et Torah. Now, obviously, what I'm saying is very dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Because it's potentially antinomian. So if you want, I'll say that in English. It's potentially dangerous because somebody's there is going to say, yeah, I kind of want to be like the Avot. I don't need all of these specifics, right? I can eat shellfish and be like Avram Avinu because I'm kind. Which means I can get rid of all of the ritual. Of course I can't do that. I can get rid of all the ritual and say, but I'm a good person. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, halavai only then. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, you know what's interesting? I don't know how many of you are in Elul mode. Rabbis have to be in Elul mode now. And part of Elul mode is we're starting to prepare all these. I'm giving 2 tshuva shirim next week, and I have to start looking at the Rambam, Hilchot Tshuva. Do you know what the hero of the Rambam is in Hilchot Tshuva? So leave that. You know what the hero of the Rambam is in all Sefer Mada, which is interesting. The hero is Avram Avinu. Because what's Mada? It's about knowing God. Who knew God better than anyone? Avram. Now you could say, no, maybe Moshe Rabbeinu. You could, no, just go through the whole book. At the end of the 10th, and again, when you get to the 10th chapter of Hilchot Tshuva, you may be surprised because the 10th chapter does not say one word about Tshuva. The 10th chapter is about relating to God out of love. And you know who his hero is? Avraham. Which means whatever level I can imagine getting to through my performance of mitzvot, Avram accomplished that. Which really then leads to a different point, and that point is, so then why at Sinai didn't God just say to us, guys, be like Avraham? No, that's all you need to do, be like Avraham. And what apparently is the answer? Is that we can't. We can't be like Avraham. We could try, but we're going to fall short. But what does God do instead? He says, okay, you guys can't be like Avraham. Let me fill up your day and your nights and your weeks and your months and your years and give you lots and lots of things to do to keep you out of trouble. By the way, the Kutzke Rabbi once said that. Not what I just said. He said, I want chassidim, followers. I don't know if he liked his followers, by the way. He locked himself in a room for at least 8 years and didn't want to talk to them. Right? I can understand. He said, I want chassidim, not who are tzaddikim, but they're too busy doing good, they don't have time to do things which are bad. That's what God did. I mean, the Kutzke Rebbe is right. That's what God did. Fill up your day, be busy, do all these things, or do all good all the time. But why do we need that? Because we're not capable of sitting around and contemplating the cosmos and then leading to a conclusion that we have to be moral and ethical and treat all people with love and respect. Avram Avinu was able to do that. We would have a harder time doing this. And therefore, our lives are full of mitzvot. I'm going to say this again. It's fascinating that when you're going to come to the land, do this ritual, and then think about what the Avot like, and have some Avraham-type qualities as you're doing this, and that we see as a common denominator in both of these commandments. So therefore, I hope that you're getting this, that there is this wonderful tension between our post-Sinai existence, and by the way, what is it that Abraham has more than anything? Knowledge of God. What is it that we completely mess up at Sinai? Knowledge of God and build a golden calf. I mean, I hope you realize how profoundly bad that is. So before any of you can tell me, oh no, I think I can do the Avram thing, well, Klal Yisrael kind of messed that up right away. We messed up that first test, as it were.
But Rabbi, we all followed him. We're all here.
God is very kind.
We're even on the road that he took on the way from Hebron to Yerushalayim. The real nearest road is Lev Yafi.
Yeah, and I'll say it again. God is very kind, and it wasn't simple. But let's continue. Source number 3 takes us to Vitzav Moshe b'zitnei Yisrael el ha'am lemor shamor et kol ha'mitzvah shenochi mitzvah etchem hayom. Now I'm going to emphasize it. You guys need to do the mitzvot. Right? You again, we want v'haya bayom asher ta'avru ta'yerdain, and now we get to our third ritual. Now, admittedly, this is a one-time ritual. This is going to be a rite of passage as we get to the land of Israel. This is what we do. Ta'avru ta'yerdain ta'aretz asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach, and again, every time it's your land, right? You're going to put up these stones. And v'katavta leim et kol divrei Torah hazot b'avarecha leman asher tavo la'aretz asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach eretz zavad chalav udvash kasher diber Hashem Elokei avotecha lach. Again, that wonderful tension between us getting it, but the God of your fathers. So that other element is there staring at us again all the time. You're going to put up these stones, and then it's going to say that you're going to bring olot and shlamim. I didn't bring any sources about that, but the first thing that you should ask yourself is, where do you find a cluster of olot and shlamim? And in terms of a procedure, in terms of offerings, what are the procedures? What are the times that olot and shlamim are brought? I'm not going to answer. You can look at ChatGPT in order to get your answer, and then pray that it's right. But it's very much a consecration. It's very much something which takes place by Sinai and when buildings are built and so on. So let's continue. And then the Torah, which will be explained, Pasuk Tet, V'deber Moshe v'Kohanim, right, you're here today. Ushmatu b'kol Hashem Elokech, v'asita et mitzvotai v'et chukav, asher anochi mitzavcha hayom. And then it gives us a list. Now, of course, those of us who, again, we're not focused, this is Har Grizim, Har Eval, and we are going to have, if you want, I would call it a re-acceptance of Torah. And if we're going to re-acceptance of Torah, if I didn't know the content, what would be the most logical suggestion to be here? The answer is Aseret HaDibrot. The only problem is we already kind of did that earlier in Parshat Ve'etchanan, but that really would be the right, I would have put that here. Enter the land, let's do it. Now there's a problem. The problem is that what exactly is the relation between Aseret HaDibrot and all the other mitzvot? Because, then we have Parshat Mishpatim, and then we have the rest of Sefer Shemot, we have all of Sefer Yikra, we have Sefer Midmar, which means there's lots of other mitzvot. So essentially we have choices now, because again, write the Torah and keep those mitzvot. So again, if I imagine that Moshe has a bag of mitzvot, so theoretically he can now pull out any of those 613. He could pull out all 613. He can go through and kind of like Hakel, let's read through mitzvot, let's accept all of them. You're entering the land, OUisrael entering the land, let's accept the mitzvot. And I'm going to point out that there's this wonderful tension between the reality of the Avot and the reality of the Banim and what exactly we're being called upon. So I'm only interested in content now. Okay, content. What is it which is said at this point after our Lot and Shlamim? So we are in Pasuk Yud, which says Asita mitzvotav et chukav, right? So that should be everything. So Pasuk Tvav, Aror ha'isha sheyaseh pesel u'masecha, the person who, now, what do you do with that, pesel u'masecha? Well, that's a good one. We like this one. By the way, go back to our legends about Avraham. Avraham, our favorite, what word do you want to use? Iconoclast was the correct word. Excellent. You should go into writing. He's our favorite iconoclast. Avraham breaks the idol, so this is great. This is absolutely great. Over here, that we need don't worship idols. Now you can have a little bit of an echo of, actually you have 3 echoes. You want the most obvious one, Aseret HaDibrot. You want the next one, the unfortunate experience that we may have had in terms of the Egel. And what's the third one, which really was the first one you should have thought of? I'll hold on to it, and you'll tell me momentarily. And then we get to Pasuk Tedvav, and it says, Arur Makle Aviv V'imo. Somebody who curses their parents. By the way, that takes you straight to the Aseret HaDibrot, and that should be easy. Arur Masig Vu Re'ehu. So I guess we're still on Aseret HaDibrot. We just went from the right side to the left side. Pasuk Yud Ched, Mishageh Iver Baderech. which is really interesting because we went to a Vayikra formulation. And by the way, these are classic Adam v'chaveros. That's not really English or Hebrew. So here are mitzvot of theft from your friend and misguiding your friend. Arur mate mishpat ger yotam va'almana. So I hope that you're realizing that there's a commonality. Arur shochev eshet aviv. Arur shochev kol behema. Arur shochev achoto. Arur shochev chutnato. Arur makera reo basater. Arur lokeach shochad lakot nefesh dam naki. Arur shelo yikim et divrei TORAH hazot. So we had a cluster of mitzvot, and where did that cluster take us? So it should have taken us to a couple of different possibilities. One should be the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, which it includes over here justice, it included over here sexual sins, it included over here stealing. Now the thing that may be honoring parents is the one that we're not sure about how that snuck in. Notice what's not here. What's not here? Any rituals not here. If you want to compare it to Aseret Dibrot, let me ask the question first, and then you'll give the answer. If I want to compare it to Aseret Dibrot, what's missing? Shabbat's missing. So that also is interesting, which means we kind of also I'm sorry, stopping in mid-sentence. Also, we kind of get this echo of Gili Arayel, Shfichat Dam, Avodah Zarah over here, which means you kind of, so maybe you wonder, why are those three so important? And the other thing which we should be thinking about is, of course, Avram Avinu. He's the one who demands of God, the judge of all the earth will not act with justice, which means the idea of acting with justice over here is one which Avram fully understands and is incorporated in his life, but he even feels that he can question God about it. And again, I'll suggest that that's interesting, but this cluster of laws which are here are ones of, again, what we have over here are laws of a rejection of idolatry. We have laws of sexual behavior or misbehavior. We have over here treating other people. Also the ger, the yatom v'almana over here, and one of having proper justice. And now the question is how hard I want to work, then claim that all of these are perhaps themes within Avraham's life. The sexual issues are the one where he or Sarah both become the victims of, but this is something which Avram does preach about. I mean, this is part of his discussion with Avimelech. And therefore the rejection of idolatry and having sexual mores is interesting, because if I go back and think about Avraham's life, and maybe I'll restate this, when all 613 commandments, I have, and again, I don't want to say that, I don't want to make this pretty and tie it with the bow and therefore say it's perfect, but I want to say that I feel a very strong Avraham presence over here, to the extent that I would almost say, when you enter the land, yes, keep all of the mitzvot, but what are the ones that we have to make a vow about and swear about and take upon ourselves, is that the decency of Avraham Avinu, which again is expressed by various laws, is something that we have to take upon ourselves. So that's what I would note. On the other hand, this emphasis in terms of the sexual mores, we already saw it back in Vayikra, where it says in source number 4, this is Vayikra Yudchet, כמעשה ארץ מצרים אשר ישבתם בה לא תעשו, כמעשה ארץ כנען אשר אני מביא אתכם שמה לא תעשו, ובחוקותיהם לא תלכו, את משפטי תעשו, את חוקותי תשמרו, ללכת במני השם, ושמרתם בחוקותי ומשפטי אשר יעשו אותם, and so on. And then it goes on to the whole list of the arayot, essentially saying, don't do the behaviors of Egypt, which again, remember, Sarah gets there, and then she's attacked immediately. Yosef gets there, and he's attacked immediately. Don't follow that type of a society, and don't follow the type of society which is in Canaan. These people were kicked out, and then we have the list. And then later on, when you get to the TORAH as well, we're told the land, or generally in Vayikra, we're told the land vomits out this kind of behavior. So just to put this together with Bereshit on the one hand, Vayikra on the other hand, we should not be as surprised to find that that's where the cluster of commandments are. When we move over to the TORAH, and that's back in source number 5, again, continuing in Tavo, we find the same kind of things again. Over here, it's if you follow all these things, you will be blessed. But if you don't follow these things, then you're going to be cursed, which seems to be that this ritual done by Hagrizim and Har Eval is the introduction. It creates a covenant. Once this covenant is created, now there's 2 sides to the covenant. You keep it. These are the implications. Everything will be good. You'll be deserving to live here. You don't keep the covenant. So this is what's going to happen. And I said the words are all over here, and I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to go that much further. I do want to note the Ramban. The Ramban over here is Kaf Chet Pasuk Tet. Let's read the Pasuk. Yukum Hashem lo la'am kadosh kasher nishbalach. Right? You will follow these things. You will become a holy people. Ki tishmor et mitzvot Hashem Elokecha v'halachta b'drachav. Same kind of tension. Right? Keep the mitzvot. That's one part of it. V'halachta b'drachav. And once again, we wonder, what does that mean? Keep the mitzvot and then walk in his paths. The Ramban writes, Yikra Shvua, Habrita Shekaratim Bahar Sinai, that all this is going back to the covenant at Sinai. And then he says, Kadosh, O Shabrita Shekaratim Avraham, Liyodachelokim Lazarecha Charecha. So the Ramban right there did what I wanted all the commentaries to do, and to know that there is this dual relationship which is taking place. There is this covenant with Avraham, and then there is this covenant with OUisrael. By the way, I don't know if you know this. These dual covenants is one of Rabbi Soloveitchik's favorite themes. Just about any student, old-time student of Rabbi Soloveitchik, if he went to a Brit and was asked to speak, he would always speak about the 2 covenants, the Brit of Avraham and the Brit by Sinai, because that was the go-to Dvar Torah of at least 1, maybe 2 generations of rabbis. It's not exactly what the Ramban is saying over here, and it's not. The way the Rabbi Soloveitchik developed it is not exactly in line here, but as I said, it's at the core. The real background for everything that I've been saying was by a parsha that we skipped. Why did we skip it? Because you guys wanted vacation, right? It was after Tisha B'Av, Bein Hazmanim. Can't learn Bein Hazmanim. It's Bal Tosef. So in source number 8, Ki v'yachashem lokecha el haaretz. This is back in Parshat Eikev. Actually, I take that back. I wrote Parshat Eikev. It's the end of Et Hanan, and then leads into Eikev. Ki v'yachashem lokecha el haaretz, asher tabas shama l'rishta. Do you realize that we have the same themes now that you're going to inherit, right? And we're going to chase out all of the inhabitants. Lo tuchat lahem brit. Don't make a covenant with them. Don't serve their gods. Pasuk Gimel. Ki am kadosh atah l'Hashem Elokecha. V'chor b'cha Hashem Elokecha lo la'am skula v'kolam. And God chose you as a special nation. Again, all this we just now saw again. When we enter the lands, we need to acknowledge all of this. And then it says something which is really depressing. Lo pasuk Zayin. God didn't choose you because you're so numerous. You're not so many of you. That the love that God has for us goes back to keeping the vow that he has with the patriarchs. That's why God took us out. V'yadata, next pasuk, God will keep his side of the covenant and pay off the future generations, the Elef Dor, and you should follow the mitzvah, the chukim mishpatim. I'm going to say it again, that this is the same tension. The Avot, we're not told what exactly they did, but we need to follow the mitzvah, the chukim, and the mishpatim. We then go into Eikev, but Eikev tishmerun etam mishpatim eila, because you keep these mishpatim, it's only by you keeping the commandments that God will keep this covenant that he made with the patriarchs. right? And then you become great in number, and so on. The Masha Nishba. Continuing in Perek Chet, Kol Mishanoch Mitzchat Tishmurun Lasot L'man Tichyun. Urivtem Avatim V'Yirashtem Ha'Ta'aretz. If you want to deserve the land, you need to keep mitzvot. Asher Nishba Hashem Lavotechem. Again, the same pension which God promised the ancestors. Next chapter, still in Akev, Perek Tet. And we're going to skip a little bit. Don't say because of their evil and our righteousness. You did not receive the land because you are so good. Because they're so bad, God chased them out. And therefore to keep this vow which they kept with the Avot. And don't think you're getting because you're so good, you're not. Am kshe oref, where does it constantly come up, that term? It's always connected, as far as I can tell, with the sin of the golden calf. You're not so good. You're not so much better than them. They're worse. But it all comes down to one point. What's that one point? Let's just say this a little bit broader than I said it till now, although I hinted at all of this. The Avot were promised the land because of their decency. The descendants were promised the land because we're their descendants. For us to deserve the land, we need to be decent. We proved our indecency with the Chet Egel. So right there, we're undeserving. We have lots and lots of mitzvot to do, which is essentially, what do you do when somebody, right away, right, you rent them an apartment, and right away, the first day, before they even move in, they do all kinds of damage. So what do you do? But you can't kick them out because you were very good friends with the grandparents. So what do? You write a contract. You write a contract which is going to be so detailed and is going to have so many requirements that it'll be very easy afterwards for you then to litigate and say, listen, you didn't stand up to your level at all. Source number 11 goes back to Avraham. But just if you want to finish this up in Pasuk Chet, the last verse, Uvachorev hiktzaftem et Hashem v'tanaf Hashem bachen l'shmid etchem. You were so bad at Chorev that God wanted to destroy you. Okay, He didn't. He forgave you. Again, we have a relationship. But we've inherited this land, yes, because of the Avot. Our whole deserving this land because of the Avot. And now what is it? Can we say it again clearly? What is it that Avram does have? Okay, Avram is decency. What is it that Avram does have? He believes in God, total belief in God. What is it that Am Yisrael have chosen, or have shown, that they don't necessarily believe in God the way that they should? In source number 11, Va'avram yoyeh l'goy gadol v'atzum v'nivruchu kol goy ha'aretz ki yadat v'leman asher yitzaveh et banav v'et beito acharav v'shamru derech Hashem lasot tzedakah u'mishpat. Which means what Avraham gives us is this basic derech Hashem, is this going with God, knowledge of God, and this basic decency. Tzedakah u'mishpat. And by the way, now go back to the couple of rituals that we have in the very, very beginning of the parasha. Go back to the third thing, go back to Har Grizim and Har Evel and how much it does reflect this kind of a pasuk, even though, yes, we say generally that we accept all of the Torah, but it's all the Torah on top of the decency of Avraham. And again, I hope that's clear. Source number 13, we're skipping 12, we'll see if we can come back to it. Amar Rav, this is what we alluded to before, Kiyem Avram Avinu Kol HaTorah Kula. So I believe Kiyem is a spiritual description and not a historical description. Avram fulfilled the entire Torah. I don't think it necessarily means that he did every single one of these mitzvot. And by the way, I want to actually read the source here because it's funny, in our minds, there's a takeaway from this because we remember the end and we don't necessarily remember that there are two opinions. You know, also, I'll give you another parallel. We have a Gemara that says, David, right? Kol misha amar David chata ein lo to'eh. That's one of the opinions. There's another opinion that says David chata. But for some reason, we take the other one's nicer. If you look over here at 13, Rav says, Avram came kol HaTorah kula. I want a definition. What is kol HaTorah kula? Don't answer me. Shenemar ikav asher shema Avram bekoli. Amar Rav shimi bar chia l'Rav ve'ema sheva mitzvot. That sounds like it's only talking about the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. Because what Torah did Avram have by that point? The only Torah that there was Sheva Mitzvot. So then it says, no, it can't be the Sefer Mitzvot. Why? Ha'ikana Mila, because then Avram also did Brit Mila. So all that this is really saying that Avram did 8 mitzvot. That's all that it's saying. Then there's another opinion over here, and it says, Amar Vitim Ravashi, Amar Rav Vitim Ravashi, or Amar Rava Vitim Ravashi, another opinion came out of Avram Afilu Eruve Tavshilin. No, he kept everything, even Eruv Tavshilin. Great. But notice there are two opinions. And notice the difference between the two. One is he kept Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach, and one is that he kept the entire corpus that we can't imagine that we're better Jews than Avram. But again, note that there were two different opinions over there. And yes, am I correct that all of us only really focused on the second one and kind of ignored the first one that says, yeah, Avram kept the entire Torah. But by the way, there are many sources, that when it talks about Torah, prior, it always refers to this as the Aseret HaDibrot. And it doesn't mean, I know you can tell me they're all within, leave it. By Yaakov, source 14, V'tav votam le'mor, kotam le'adoni le'esav, kom le'avdecha Yaakov, and Lavan garti v'charta. I was with Lavan, and that's why I was delayed. Rashi, actually, there should be a ... here in 15. Davar acher, garti v'gematria taryag. Klomar, and Lavan harasha garti v'taryag mitzvot shamarti. V'lo lamadti ma'asav hara'im. So can I tell you a couple of things about this? First of all, I downloaded 2 different articles about this. One is an article which explains how Yaakov kept all of these things. What does it mean? Did he learn Mishnayot? Maybe. A second article was showing that this phrase in Rashi was not quoted by anybody until the 16th century, and it's not there in any earlier versions of Rashi. And most likely it was from a different midrash or late midrash, and somebody penned it on afterwards. And again, you know what? You can look at source 16. It's the Lekach Tov. In Midrash, Lekach Tov is a late collection of midrashim. Midrash. Om Yaakov Avinu kiyamti kol HaTorah chutz mikivud aveim. That's what he says to Lavan. Sorry. That's what he says to Esav. Chutz miperi v'rivya. I also didn't have kids. Im Lavan hishlamti taryag mitzvot. By Lavan, then I had kids and shlamti taryag mitzvot. By the way, lo hishlamti kibud aveim, and that's why it's interesting. Minyan garti, right? Taryag mitzvot, minyan garti. Shamar kol mitzvot, and then the whole discussion what shamar may mean. So let's see how much time we have and see how much more we can. When we have done of all the mitzvahs, the Meshach Chachma by Yaakov by Yichanet Ta'ir explains it. That's your homework. Very, very nice explanation, and you'll accept it. Essentially, an Erev Tavshilin is because he may have more guests coming. So Avraham is always anticipating more guests. So Avraham has to keep on cooking because more guests are coming. So therefore specifically, that's Meshach Chachma, specifically Erev Tavshilin.
Yeah, but when? On what day?
On what day? He kept Pesach. Everybody knows he kept Pesach. And you know what else happened when he kept Pesach? People came. So, but right? He made ugot. I know you're going to tell me ugot or chametz. Okay, let me try to put this together, and we're going to ignore this long Ramban and the other long Ramban, and let me try to put this together because I want to go back to the antinomian aspect. The one who dances around this a bit and I didn't bring you any of the sources, and I couldn't bring you any of the sources for multiple reasons, but that is the Ishbitzer. The first reason I couldn't bring the Ishbitzer is because I always make fun of teachers, rabbis, women who quote the Ishbitzer, the Meshiloach. Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. I always you have to suspect them of being followers of Shabtai Tzvi. And I'm probably understating this right now. The Ishbitzer is so interesting, but the Ishbitzer is also extremely challenging, extremely dangerous. And I do want to stress, the Ishbitzer was a tzaddik, and his followers were tzaddikim, and his son was a tzaddik, and those who follow in the path. It's just that he says some really, really challenging things. The most famous one and the most disturbing one in my mind is when he says something like, Pinchas was wrong and Zimri was right. Right? I don't know how you say such a thing, with a straight face. So, as I said, if you're a follower of Shabtai Tzvi, you need then to follow. You need then to break every single, rule in the Torah. So why not? But he does talk about the higher level of observance of those who just have the belief in God without all the clutter of all the mitzvot to do. The mitzvot kind of get in the way of real service of God. Now, if you want, we can find Rav Kook saying things like this. But again, I have to take everything out of context in order to find and to locate this. And as I said, I found a number of teachings of the Ishbitzer that say this. So I am the one who quotes the Ishbitzer and say, be really, really careful. But I nonetheless want to go back to this because it's not a question of the reality that mitzvot are bad for us. It's quite the opposite. It's that mitzvot in the time of the Avot were unnecessary. Look, the big problem with Yaakov is to say Yaakov kept TORAH mitzvot. It's a little hard to say that when you marry two sisters. Okay, I don't want to have to work any harder than that. To say that Yaakov kept all TORAH mitzvot is not easy. The Ramban's going to say, and by the way, it's not just the Ramban. The Ramban, that's what I wanted to show you. It's the Ramban, and it's the Ibn Ezra, and it's the Balei Tosfot. It's funny that the Ramban gets all the credit for it. In source 17, it says, he said, no. It's that the land of Israel can't tolerate the sexual sins, so therefore Rachel had to die. Right? So therefore Yaakov kept this in the land of Israel. Again, it's not such that Balei Tos would say this, the Ramban says this, it's that Israel needs this. Okay, let's stop that for a second and let me try again. What interests me is source number 12 and a legend, and how strong this is, I don't know. Source number 12 is a description of the Messianic age. V'nachal ruach Hashem, and so on. V'harichu b'yirat Hashem, v'lo l'mareinav yishpot, v'lo l'mishma aznav yochiach, v'shafat v'tzedek dalim, and so on. V'ruach tzvatav yamit rasha. Lo yarei v'lo yoshchitu b'chol arkachi ki milah ha'aretz de'at Hashem. The wonderful description of the Messianic age is one of justice and one of knowledge of God. And it's not one of keeping Erev Tavshilin. I'm saying that's interesting because the description of the Messianic age is one of knowledge of God. And do you realize that there's something now very avot about that description? Which means I can look now at history with a much, much broader perspective and say that the avot existed on this so much of a higher level of they walked with God and they followed God and they loved God. They did what God wanted and they did not have the clutter of all of the mitzvot. And I apologize for the word clutter. I apologize for that. But again, that's what the Ishbitzer said, the clutter. That's really the phrase that he uses. On the other hand, we need this. We need this because we need God consciousness. And I'll go even further. What is it more than anything else that gives us God consciousness? And that's not a Torah mitzvah. It's not a Torah mitzvah. It's a rabbinic mitzvah. What is it? Brachot. Bracha rishona. Brachot anenin. To say a Borah Priya eats before I eat something, before I eat a fruit. To say, which means God is saying, make a bracha on this, say thank you, have God consciousness, everything to do. So why do we need the Rabbanan made this up. But what did it give us? It gave us God consciousness. What is it? Obviously, what the Chachamim were saying. Okay, I know these people. They need God consciousness. They need this in their lives. It's not enough just to daven 3 times a day. And then they say maybe Marav you don't even need. It's not enough. We need more of this. We need throughout the day to be able to be thinking about God. So you know who didn't need that? Avram didn't need that. You know why? Because Avram was thinking about God all the time. And Avram then translated thinking about God all the time into, if God is kind to me and God gives me chesed and God created a world of kindness, I need to be kind to other people. I need to be godlike. And his whole mind and heart are consumed with God, being like God, helping others, decency, morality, again, knowledge of God. So it's fascinating that we can't do that. We mess up. And when we mess up, God says, listen, you're inheriting, and I'm friends with your grandfather, and I'll let you rent the place, but there's lots and lots of details over here, and if you don't keep it, you're going to be kicked out. And you need to do all of these mitzvot. You need to do all of these details. And the land itself is not going to tolerate certain things. There's rules over here. There's rules of things that you can do in this apartment, and there's the rules that you can't do in this apartment. Why? Because it's my apartment. I don't want certain things being done over here. That's just the way that it is. Someplace else to go do what you want. And that is really what's emerging. So I'm going to say it's fascinating when we go look back again and look at Parshat Ki Tavo. There's a long tochacha which says, this and this and this and this and this is going to happen to you if you don't follow this. Realize there's no promises over here. There's no guarantees over here. You can and you will break this lease. I may let you rent it again afterwards, but this is not necessarily going to be a happy ending. But then I go back and I look at the 3 different rituals, right? I look at coming to land, taking those first fruits, and remembering the avot, and then giving it out and being like the avot and taking care of the disenfranchised. I look at that other mitzvah in terms of the maaser, and what am I told, right? To share with others. On top of all of this impossible level to be happy also and make other people happy. I imagine Avram was a very happy person. I do. I imagine that Avram was somebody who's full of so much love and cheer and goodness and decency and deserves to be the Rambam's hero. Absolutely deserves to be that person. And then I think about the end of days. Yes, we need to come in. The end of days, we need to get back to, again, I'm not talking about will there be mitzvot or will there not be mitzvot in a messianic age. I hope you all realize that's a very interesting discussion, and there are various opinions on this. The famous idea that maybe you've heard that one day pigs will become kosher. I wrote about this. I have an article called When Pigs Fly. The idea about the pigs being kosher is not so much about us being able to eat pigs. Maybe it's about evolution. They'll develop the various qualities. Maybe it's about really Esav, who's compared to the pig, and it's saying a much larger thing, that Esav is going to become kosher. That Esav is going to develop some kind of instead of just on outwardly, but inwardly also develop a decency. Whether or not there will be mitzvot latid lavo, that doesn't concern me. What concerns me is that instead of mitzvot being just performative, that mitzvot be performative but impactful. And as a whole cluster of behaviors, instead of getting the way of servicing God, they bring us to the service of God in a true way and bring us to this God consciousness until we get to this point that knowledge of God spreads out throughout the universe. It spreads out all over the place. And that's really what we're seeing over here in Yeshayahu. So what I'm saying is that it's interesting to, again, just to chart what the Avot were like, what happens at Sinai, what gets messed up by Sinai, what we're being warned about before into the land, what the rituals that we have in this week's parsha, what are they focusing on, and what's this underlying issue? And the other underlying issue is this dual relationship with the land of Israel. It is, yes, we are entering the land, it's ours, we've inherited it, but the word inherit itself is a weighty term, because the word inherit means you inherited because you had this other relative who actually was the rightful owner. And if you want to be the heir, you need to show that you're the rightful heir. And it could be that certain behaviors you do, then you're going to break this inheritance and it's not going to work. And I'm saying that dual statement, which keeps coming up again and again, I'm giving you the land which I promised to them. I'm giving it to you, then I had a covenant with them. So now what we need to do is that we need now to create a covenant. But it really was interesting that the things which were stressed by Har Gerizim and Har Eval really came down to decency, came down much more to the Sheva Mitzvot. Maybe you can argue the Aseret HaDivrot, but it came down to things of decency on the one hand and things which the land can't tolerate on the other hand, and saying, okay, you want to live here, we all do, we want to be deserving of this, and thankfully God gave us all these mitzvot because it absolutely keeps us out of trouble. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.